Welcome to Chapter 12. In this chapter, we discuss leadership. We'll look at the evolution of leadership studies over the decades and explore the ways in which leadership is regarded today. Leadership is defined as an influence process between a leader and followers towards accomplishing shared goals, commonly beneficial goals, organizational goals. So leadership is the process through which a leader or a group of leaders influence followers with the objective of satisfying organizational objectives that are beneficial both for the leader and the followers. In the early 1900s, when researchers began exploring what makes an effective leader, they identified a list of traits, personality characteristics, and physical traits that were linked to effectiveness in a leadership position. These characteristics were things like intelligence, charisma, energy, ability to inspire others. The trait approach identified those traits as directly contributing to leader effectiveness. And the trait theories were also nicknamed the Great Man approach because in those days, most of the leaders studied were indeed men, mostly white men in the United States. In the 1940s, researchers again wanted to look more specifically at leader effectiveness because they became frustrated with the trait approach explanation. They found that in fact there was no uniform list of traits that could be associated with leader effectiveness. And in fact, it was not who you are, your personality or your physical traits, but rather how you behave. And so the behavioral theorists argued that those leaders who are able to balance two types of behaviors are those leaders who will be most effective in influencing others. The two categories of behaviors that those behavioral theorists identified are consideration and initiating structure. Consideration refers to the consideration that leaders give to their followers, meaning the individual relationships that they have with the followers, their interest in the followers, their willingness to listen to followers' needs, interests, motivations, aspirations, and try to nurture those. And so consideration are more interpersonal type relationships between leaders and followers. Initiating structure type behaviors are those behaviors that are focused on the task, meaning the leaders focus on what needs to get done, what needs to be accomplished in order to accomplish and meet organizational goals and objectives. The behavioral theorists argued that leaders who can balance both types of behaviors, meaning focus on people and on the task at hand, will be more effective. As time passed and organizational environments became less and less stable, researchers recognized that in fact, it's not just the behavior that matters, but also whether or not the behavior matches the situation. And that led to the emergence of the contingency theories. Those theories suggested that the leader's characteristics, both who the leader is and how the leader behaves, matters within a given situation or context. And the leader's effectiveness depends on not just their characteristics, not just their behaviors, but their ability to match their behaviors to the given situation. And so leaders' effectiveness is determined by their ability to match their behaviors to the demands of the situation. And we'll look at a couple of examples for that. So to summarize, the trait approach focused on individual characteristics. Who is the leader? The general view of the trait theories is that you are born a leader. You are born with innate characteristics, personality, that predisposes you to become an effective leader. The behaviorists argued it's not who the leader is, but rather how the leader behaves. This is a significant counter-argument to the trait approach because the behavioral theorists suggested that in fact people can learn how to become effective leaders. Because if effectiveness as a leader depends on your behaviors, behaviors are learned. We can learn how to behave in order to become more effective. And so the behavioral theorists argued leaders are made, leaders are not born. The contingency theories suggested that it is both the traits of the leader and the leader's behavior that matter within a given context. These theorists focused on what leader traits or behaviors are effective in different situations. And indeed, a leader will be effective if he or she can match the behavior to the situation. What are some of the things that the contingency theorists looked at in terms of the situation? They looked at what kinds of relationships leaders have with their followers. Are they well respected, well liked? Are their requests complied with? Do they have good relationships with their followers, or do they have contentious relationship with their followers? How mature are their followers in the sense of organizational maturity? Are those experienced, long-tenured employees who have a lot of experience and know the job? Or are these novices who still need a lot of hands-on guidance? These theorists also looked at task structure. How structured is the task? Think about working in a restaurant, in a fast food restaurant. Your job will be highly structured. There is very limited room for creativity or free thinking. You know exactly how each food item needs to be prepared, right? This is one of the strengths of fast food chains, is that you get the same food regardless of the location. And so the job is very highly structured with a lot of guidance regarding how the job needs to be completed. Compare that to a freestanding restaurant in which the chef goes to market and sees what's in season and makes the menu of the day. This is a very highly unstructured job where there is a lot of room for creativity and free thinking and independent decision making. So the type of job that the employees do, whether it's very structured or very unstructured, will have implications for which leadership style is most appropriate. And the last variable that the contingency theorists looked at is power of the leader. How much power does the leader have? We can use the fast food restaurant example again. If you are a manager of let's say a McDonald's restaurant, you do not really have a lot of power. Opening hours are determined by corporate. Uniforms are determined by corporate. Menu items, suppliers, pricing, everything is determined by the corporate office. You do not really have, as a manager, a lot of decision-making power. You can make scheduling, you provide performance evaluations for your employees, but not much more. Compare that to the amount of power that a restaurant owner has in a freestanding restaurant where he or she can decide the menu, the design, the hours of operation, what is being served, when it's being served, who is hired, and all of that. And so the power of the leader will also determine the kinds of behaviors that he or she needs to engage in order to be effective. So in this slide, we explore two different contingency theories that are explained in detail in your book chapter. The first one is Fiedler's contingency model. Fiedler suggested that leaders have one of two styles, either task-oriented leadership or relationship-oriented leadership, very closely aligned with the behavioral theorists of initiating structure and consideration. You might disagree with Fiedler and say that a leader can have more than one style, but Fiedler's suggestion was that leaders have one dominant style. Either they tend to be a task-oriented leader or they have a preference for being a relationship-oriented leader. Fiedler also looked at three situational variables. He looked at the relationship with the followers, Are the relationships strong? Do the followers endorse, trust, and follow the leader freely? Or are relationships poor? Do followers question the leader's decision-making and don't openly support him or her? Fiedler also looked at task structure, which we explained in the previous slide, and the level of power that the leader had. If we look at these three variables, we can come up with a number of different combinations. Fiedler's model actually identifies these 9 different quadrants with these different combinations and makes recommendations regarding the most suitable leadership style for each of the different combinations. The idea here is not to memorize those, but rather to understand Fiedler's key suggestion, that effective performance of the leader results of a good match between the leader's style and the situation. And Fiedler suggested that task-oriented leaders will be most effective when they can exert more influence and control. Whereas in situations where the leader has less control and less ability to influence, the leader will benefit from having a more relationship-oriented style. So even though we might disagree with Fiedler's propositions, and we might argue that a leader can adjust his or her style to suit the situation, it's important to recognize some of the key takeaways from Fiedler's work. One is that a leader who is effective in one context will not necessarily be effective in another. And we often see this happen in organizations when individuals take on international transfers and find themselves in a completely different cultural context and are not able to perform in the same way. Also, leaders who are promoted or change divisions and find themselves in a different kind of team might experience different types of performance levels. And so one key takeaway here is that success in one context does not guarantee success in another. This is also related to a similar idea that if a leader is not successful in one context, we should not be so quick to discount that individual and might possibly want to transfer this leader into a different context where he or she might be more successful. And in today's world, in the competition for top talent, this is an important consideration, that leaders who are not successful in one context might still be successful in a different context. A different contingency theory is Robert House's path-goal theory. Robert House suggested that it's the leader's role to put followers on the right path towards goal accomplishment, and that the leader needs to match his or her style to the follower's needs. For example, a leader should be more directive when the task is very ambiguous. For example, highly unstructured tasks with a lot of ambiguity, and where rules and procedures are unclear. In those types of situations, House recommends a more directive leadership style, which will support employees in these types of ambiguous and unclear situations. Of course, when there is a lot of information available and employees know exactly what they need to do, a directive leadership style is not necessary. House also suggests that a supportive leadership style would be most appropriate when employees are doing work that is either stressful or frustrating or unsatisfying, maybe menial labor or jobs that are not very meaningful. House also created a follow-up model in which he makes additional recommendations. For